Yes, I didn't realize it was time. It's time. Okay, you good? All right, everybody, glad you're here, whoever's here. I'm glad you guys are there. Hello, Nick, how are you, pal? All right, so we talked about fear last week. Anybody got any questions about that? We went over a lot of stuff. Any questions about that? Hey, Donna, remind me to give you guys those worksheets so you can have.
Please.
Yeah. And anybody on there that I have these worksheets that we've been talking about online, so I can email them to you if you need them. Just send me a message, and I will send you a copy. Any questions on what we've been doing so far? Nobody? Everybody's okay. So we've been talking a lot about self-will. Starting with resentments and going through all this stuff. Actually going back to the third step. When we were doing the third step, we talked a lot about self-will. And what we have to understand is that self-will will not fix self-will. Okay, so we have to do some work. We got to do some things. We went through resentments. We went through fear. And the next list on our inventory list is our sexual conduct. Okay? So let's go to the book and let's go to page 68. Bottom of the page. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there. But above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. So, the first thing he says here that's important, that we need to understand, is that many of us needed an overhauling there. So, I'm not sure if we did this yet or not, but I don't think we did, but if we did, we'll just do it again anyway, because unlike the, in the third step where we talked about our will in our lives, we said that was our thinking and our actions, okay? And so when we came into the fourth step and we looked at resentments, we looked at our resentments, mentally and physically through our thinking and our actions, right? Physically did what we physically did. So we did that with resentments, we did that with fear. Now when we get to the sexual inventory, it's a little bit different here. In the sexual inventory, what we're really talking about is we're not talking about the physical part of our sexual inventory, okay? Because here he says many of us needed an overhauling there. So can you overhaul a sexual act you had last week? No? Can you overhaul a sexual act you had last year? No? Right. So you can't overhaul a sexual act you've already had, right? So the importance of that then is Bill's not talking about in the physical sense. So he's talking about up here what's in my head. That's what we're going to be inventorying and looking at when we come to the sexual inventory part. It's about what's in my head rather than who's in my bed. Okay? What's in my head rather than who's in my bed. And how do we know that? Because of the sentence here that says we needed an overhauling there. And if you quickly turn to page 69, the second paragraph down, it says, in this way we try to shape a sane and sound idea for our future sex life, you see? So what we're talking about then is we're talking about taking a look at what we've done before. And I had a guy that turned in his fourth step to me, and it was actually really interesting. He wrote erotica down for this, and it's not what we're talking about. I tried to explain, he was like, pardon my language, but he was like, I was banging my neighbor's wife furiously on the kitchen table as the rain beat on the window. And I was like, I'm not kidding you, this is what he gave me. And I went, that's really interesting if you're writing a friggin' erotica book. I said, it's got no place in your inventory thing. He says, why not? He says, and this was what he listed on all of these things. And I said, no, no, no. This is about why were you with your neighbor's wife? What lack of morals, what lack of values, what lack of principles allowed you to be with your neighbor's wife? Not how you was banging her. That's not the relevant part. That's not going to help you in any way. So we need an overhauling there, but we need it up here in our head. Okay? So that's what this part is about. Does that make sense to you? Now, the cause of all sexual problems is either fear, resentment, dishonesty, or selfishness. I'm going to say that again so you understand it. The cause of all sexual problems is either fear, resentment, dishonesty, or selfishness. Okay? And on your sheets that I gave you, there's a whole sheet. You know, there's one for resentment, there's one for fear, there's one for sexual conduct, and there's one for harms to others, right? The sexual conduct sheet is what we're talking about now, what we're working on now. And most of us tend to think that if it's a sexual act, it's got to do with our sexual instinct, the third column. And column 3 is broken into three parts. The third part of the third column there on your sheets is sexual instinct. Okay? And usually, probably 99 out of 100 times, your sexual acts have nothing to do with the sexual instinct. They have much more to do with the social instinct or the security instinct. What do I mean by that? Has anybody ever had sex to be liked and respected? The rest of you liars, no? Okay. Has anybody ever had sex to feel secure?
Damn right.
And the rest of you liars, no? Okay. Has anybody ever had sex for financial gain, whether it be money or dope or whatever? Okay? So,
I'm still on the respect thing.
I never had sex for respect.
somebody put one of these things on here that says, yeah, and a guy going like this. All right, save those jokes. But you see, that's my point. So when we start looking at our sexual conduct, we're going to realize that most of the time it has nothing to do with the sexual instinct.
I said a light bulb.
You just hit a light bulb?
Light bulb moment.
Okay.
A light bulb moment.
Very good. You want to share that?
Well, going back to like, I can't think of the word, we listed our, you know my brain a little bit, the principles.
Principles?
So, yeah, there's a lot of principles, right?
There's a lot of principles that come up in the sexual category. A lot of principles. Now don't forget, I told you numerous times as we've been doing this 4-step thing, and I'll tell you again, principles are the most important thing to inventory. You will get the most spiritual growth from inventorying principles. And when it comes, again, what is a principle? A principle is a moral, a value, or a belief. That's what a principle is. And if you start thinking about a moral, a value, or a belief, you know, and if you look at the other end of that, a lack of morals, a lack of value, and a lack of belief is a principle just as much as a moral value and a belief is, right? So the lack of is the same thing. And those morals, values, and beliefs, those, if you look at that, just about every time you had sex with somebody, it's got to do with something like that. So, all right. So again, the cause of all sexual problems is either resentment, fear, dishonesty, or selfishness. So at the bottom of page 68 it says, one set of voices cry that sex is a lust of a lower nature, a base necessary procreation. Then we have voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbitrator of anyone's sex conduct. That's not what we're here for, okay? We all have sex problems. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? That's the question. What can we do about that? Okay? So, I don't know if you noticed, ironically, but all this sex stuff here is on page 69. Just happened to fall on that, you know?
It's done working.
You know that joke where the newcomer says to his, you know, they're talking about, he goes to his sponsor and he's got a problem with you know, sexual problem, and the sponsor says, go home and read page 69 and call me. So after the meeting, the guy goes home and he opens the book, and instead of going to 69, he goes to page 96, because, you know, he's a newcomer, he's got shit backwards. And he reads page 96, it says, do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. And he goes, oh, it's a great program, man. He calls his sponsor, I love this program. Of course, he was on the wrong page. All right. So, the main reason that we're going to take a look at our sexual conduct, and on page 69 here, we're going to come to a bunch of questions. If you don't do the inventory process and don't answer these questions, specifically these questions here on page 69, and you don't inventory this, then the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to repeat the same shit over and over again. Okay? If you don't take a look at it and start correcting it, you're going to repeat it again and again. Okay? So, he says, we reviewed our conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? So, with each relationship, I want to ask myself, where had I been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? You get some really eye-opening moments when you truthfully answer these questions. Whom had we hurt? Well, that's another thing that becomes an eye-opener. Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? You know, some of us are so sick we do that shit on purpose, right? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. And if you realize your sheets that I gave you, that exact wording is on your sheet. Okay? So, on column 4 on your sheets, that's exactly what it says, what we just read here. So, those questions need to be answered with each relationship. Okay? Besides doing your list on your 4th step. He says, in this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? Has anybody here ever had a relationship that you weren't selfish with? Nobody has their hand up here. How about you guys there? No? We ask God to mold our ideas and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. So what is he talking about? He's talking about our basic sexual instinct that God gave us. And why did God give us that basic sexual instinct? So we would reproduce and man would not become extinct. That was the reason that God gave us that basic instinct. And don't forget, God made it enjoyable. God made sex enjoyable, because if he didn't, who the hell would want to do it? come home from work, oh God, I gotta have sex. No. So God made sex enjoyable, so we would do it. The problem with us is we take the God-given natural right basic instinct of reproducing way out into left field, and we find ourselves in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person or persons or things for some of us. And here's what he says: whatever our ideals turn out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God that what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. So, you remember the mantra for resentment? Resentment comes from a threat to any basic instinct. Can't do anything about other people. Can't do anything about what other people do. But maybe with God's help, I can react differently and not get mad. If I don't get mad, I'm not going to be angry. If I'm not angry, I won't have a resentment. If I don't have a resentment, I'm not blocked off from God. Right? So, my sexual deviation comes from a threat to any basic instinct also. Just like it does with the fear or anything else. And again, I can't do anything about other people. Can't do anything about what other people do. But maybe with God's help, I can react differently and not do what I know I shouldn't be doing. Okay? And one more thing I want to share with you about this here on your column 3, the two boxes that are under the sexual instinct. One says acceptable sex relations, the other says hidden sex relations. Let me see something this way. See if you follow along with me. Pass that down to Donna. So I suggest you make copies of that
Yes.
before you use it, before you write on it. It's good to work with other people. So on column 3, again, third part of column 3 is your sexual instinct. And it's broken into two. And column 3 is your 3 basic instincts of life. Your social instinct, your security instinct, your sexual instinct. And the sexual instinct is broken into acceptable sex relations and hidden sex relations. And people get really confused about that. And there's nothing to be confused about. It's very simple. If it's not your partner, whoever your partner may be, or your husband or wife, or if your fiance, your husband or wife, your living partner.
Then did you say acceptable or hidden? Was that wording changed? Did it not used to be acceptable or unacceptable?
No, it
It's
didn't
always
change.
hidden.
You remember it wrong. It always said hidden.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I thought it said acceptable, unacceptable.
No.
Okay,
No, acceptable sex relations and hidden sex relations.
okay.
So, what was I saying? So,
Your partner.
thank you. I had a mature moment there. Hi, Donna. How are you? Not you, it's Donna. Yeah.
Fine, Danny, we already had this conversation.
No, so if it's your partner, however you define your partner, it's a living partner, a husband, a wife, your partner. You know who your partner is. If it's your partner, then it goes under the acceptable. If it's not your partner, then it goes under the hidden. For example, let's say, I'll just use Scott for an example. Scott's married, and he has an affair with somebody. He has an affair with Nancy, whoever Nancy is.
My mother.
No.
Wow,
You had to go there, didn't you?
yeah.
Scott, what are you doing with her mom?
Yeah, but
Unfortunately, it's my mom's name too.
Is it all
The plot thickens.
Right.
Switch names.
Jane.
All right.
You have it? So Scott has an affair with Jane, okay? Now he's doing his inventory a year later, 2 months later, doesn't matter when, okay? So his wife is X, let's just say. So when he's writing, if X is the one in column 1, whatever he's writing in column 2 and checking in column 3, when he gets to the sexual instinct, he's going to check the acceptable sex relation. Okay? When he's writing, if the name in column 1 is Jane, when he gets to the 3rd column, he's going to mark the hidden sex relation. You understand? So if it's not your partner, it's the hidden part. If it is your partner, it's the
What if it's
acceptable.
somebody you just met?
If it's somebody you just met,
Or somebody might wanna know.
no. What are you
They're
saying?
not your partner, you just met them, it's a one night stand, is that acceptable or hidden?
I think if it goes with your moral.
Well, come on now, let's see what that,
I'm
okay, that's a fair
You're not
question.
married.
That's a
and
fair
you're
question.
not-
Let me repeat that question so they hear it. Cindy asked the question, what if it's somebody she just
You
met,
didn't
but it's
have
not
to
your
say who
partner?
asked the question.
Huh?
You didn't have to say who asked the question.
Yeah, do that.
Did I say Cindy? I meant Nancy. So, the key thing there is you said it wasn't the partner. So that means that you do have a partner.
No, I said, if you're not married and they're not married, or you don't have a partner and they don't have a partner,
Well, that's
then it's
different.
acceptable.
If it goes with your moral compass, I think.
Right,
that's-
right.
Well, no, then it gets broken down into, what was it about? Was it just about getting laid?
Right.
yeah.
Okay, if it's just about getting laid, then it might not require a check-in either.
I didn't mean it like that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's all right, hold on, guys.
I agree.
It was just
Okay.
funny, yeah.
Well, what if, for you, or not you specifically, but for, let's say for me, it's just about getting laid, but I know for a fact that for them, it's not. And I do it anyway.
Ooh.
That's a good question. So the question then was, if it was for me, that I just wanted to get laid, but I knew it wasn't just about getting laid for the other person, then do you consider that an acceptable sex relation?
For me, no.
No.
I don't consider that acceptable.
Right, so then it would be hidden.
You're hurting somebody else.
But, again, there may be situations where a check doesn't go in either box. Okay? It all depends on what the situation is. But it's possible, I mean, we're not looking to check every box in column 3. So if I had something and it affected my social instinct, what did it affect? My self-esteem or my personal relations? If it affected my security instinct, what did it affect? My material or my emotional? Possibly both. And if it's a sexual instinct, did it affect my acceptable sex relations? Well, if I'm not committed to anybody, then it didn't affect my acceptable ones. Okay? Did it affect my hidden sex relations? Well, I don't have hidden sex relations, right? But if it was under the pretense of this person was trying to get serious and I wasn't, I would consider that a hidden, because your motive is hidden.
And it's selfish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go down the checklist.
Yeah,
that's
and then when you ask those questions on page 69, it's certainly going to be selfish, I mean, for people like us, basically, just about every relationship we had is going to be selfish, I don't know.
I'm paying for it now, though.
Huh?
I know you are.
I'm paying for it now. I'm trying to do that.
I know you are.
Okay. So, now, look what he says, we're on page 70. So he says, suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so. But this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done, and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and we will have learned a lesson. Now listen to this, very important. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. So, and there's situations where I had situations from my own personal thing that I really wasn't sorry, but I didn't want to keep doing that to people. So I had to find, how can I be sorry? Well, I didn't find that till I came out on the other side of my inventory and through the fifth step. Because I honestly wasn't sorry for a lot of the things I did. I shared with you my personal principle about being with women, right? So to me, there was nothing to be sorry about. But looking at it and saying, okay, I see how that's warped and that hurts people, and I had a real desire to change my life and not continue to do that. Okay? So here he says, to sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right idea, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves to heart into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. And in case you don't know what the imperious urge is, that means your horny condition. Back in the 30s, that was a nice way of saying your horny condition. Imperious urge. Okay, so now he says, if we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. We've listed and analyzed our resentments. We've begun to comprehend their fertility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. Now listen, I shared this with you before. This is the first time in this process of the 12 steps that we're coming to an actual personality change. I shared with you before that if you do these 12 steps and follow the directions, that you will actually change your very personality. Your character will change. You'll be somebody different when you come out of this, okay? You can't do this spiritual stuff, stay on the spiritual path and be the same son of a bitch when you come out the other end of it.
Right.
So this is proof that you have had an actual personality change. Listen to this. We have begun to comprehend their fertility and fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill to all men, even our enemies, for we look at them as sick people. I don't know about you guys, but I could never have done that when I got here. That wasn't me. That's not who I was. But I can tell you today that's pretty true for me. So somewhere along the line during this process, I've changed my personality. I've changed my very character to be somebody that I learned tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward everybody. And even my enemies, I look at them as sick people. So, again, that's something that just can't happen for somebody like me until I've changed through this recovery process. Then he says, we have listened to people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. Okay, so that brings us to our harms to others list. So, So some of the things that I want to look at is, have I used sex for personal relations? Have I used sex for security purposes? Have I used sex to build my own self-esteem? Okay? These are very common things. Okay? What we get here is we get different. And that's what recovery is about, getting different. Anybody got any questions on any of this stuff? Because there's a lot of issues when it comes to the sexual conduct that needs to be inventoried. Anybody want to talk about any of it?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
So like like saying when you have sex, it's always for like self-esteem or comfort or security. I mean, is it ever just physical, or is there always some underlying, need to want to feel better?
Well, yeah, it is physical. It's probably always physical, and you can probably hide what it really is under the fact that it's just a physical act. I just like having sex and I just want to have sex. But who are you having sex with? What are the circumstances there? If two people are having sex, there's chances are there's probably something more to it than the physical act. I mean, how long does the physical act last? At my age, not long, but but when I was younger, it lasted a while longer, but not today, but the point is that, we like to tell ourselves it's about the physical thing, but really, it's about something else too. It could be with somebody that you really love, and that's and that makes the physical much more enjoyable. It makes the whole thing real. But
I thought, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but like I thought when I got off the drugs and things like that, that compulsive need to want to do it all the time, would subside a little bit. But the last year, it's like went up. And I mean, I already went through the 4-step and everything, but I was just wondering, like, why do you think that it's like a compulsive need? I don't know if it's reassurance or I'm not real sure.
yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of times, we'll label it what it really is not. When we get into 6 and 7, we're going to start realizing something important. We're going to realize that the action is rarely the defect. And I'm telling you that now because it's relevant to what you just said. But I want to say that again, that in 6 and 7, that when we're looking at our character defects, the action is rarely the defect. So you're running around like a rabbit, hitting everything that's moving. If it ain't nailed down, you're hitting it, right? And so the natural thing, if you're talking with your sponsor, right? The natural thing to say is, well, you know what? You're just a horny little bastard, And maybe 1 out of 1,000 that might be true. So I won't say it's not true and it can't be true, but the chances of that being the truth is very rare. So in other words, what I found out about myself, I thought I was that horny little bastard, right? If it wasn't nailed down, I was trying to hit it. And what it was is I wasn't oversexed, I was undersecure.
Yeah, I like what you said though about that reassurance or whatever. And I think when you say that, we know.
I
Yeah.
definitely don't think that
Yeah.
I'm 1 out of 1,000. I think
No.
I'm pretty sure that it is.
Yeah, but that's our natural thought is that I'm just horny.
Right.
Can I reassure you another way though? The love of God. I can't cook you something special. Send you a card.
All right. So, but really, I mean, what you're saying is so important because mostly everybody that we're going to deal with is got that, and I'm not just talking about men. I've sponsored many women over the years, and they got the same shit as we do.
Right.
Sometimes in spades, okay? I'll tell you a funny story. I remember one night, we were in a meeting in this room right here, and I was sitting right there where I always sit, right? And the room was packed. And it was just, the meeting was just about to start. Cindy, I don't know if you were here. But the door opened and this beautiful lady, tall, walked in with a mini skirt and boots and a figure that was a 10 out of a 10 and a face like an angel. And she walked around the room, and the only seat that was open was right about there, so she sat right across from me. And the whole meeting, I'm going, yeah, she's beautiful, you know. I'm trying not to concentrate on her, I'm trying to concentrate on the meeting. She was just so beautiful, right? After the meeting was over, she came up to me, and she had heard me speak at a convention in Dallas. And she just moved up here, and I can't remember her name,
I
but
don't remember her name
you know what I'm talking about?
I
Tall,
do, yeah.
gorgeous, beautiful.
either.
And she says to me, I heard you speak a couple of years ago in Dallas. I'm up here for about 6 or 8 months, and I would really love for you to sponsor me. And I sponsor women all the time, but I says, I don't think I could do that. And she says, why not? And I says, I could never sit through your fourth step. I was being honest, right? I was about 10 years sober. We're not talking cured here, right? So she said, if you take me up to that point and you can't do it, I'll get somebody else to do that part. And I said, fine. And I worked for her the whole 6, 8 months that she was here. And she moved back down. I haven't seen her in
God, who was
15,
that?
18 years it's been. But I was able, it wasn't easy. I was able, I was single, and I thought she was one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. But I was able to sit down with her and work with her like she was an alcoholic.
Right.
Or not. And I was so proud of myself, so proud of myself, and I actually did a fourth step with her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's what I said when she did her fourth step. But, I you know, because I thought for sure when we get to that point, I'm going to get one of these ladies here to take over. But I didn't have to. I was able to sit down, and I was able to talk to her like one alcoholic to another and work with her. And it was fine, you know. I don't know why I thought of that, because this was sitting in this room, that's what happened. But
I
anyway,
got a distorted memory of that. I remember it a different way.
yeah, because she walked in and the room got silent. It was like everybody went,
I could have swore somebody else sponsored her though. That's what I'm.
you know, it's kind of like you're on a plane and you're sitting there and this beautiful woman's walking down the aisle and you go, I hope she's sitting here. And she sits there, you know.
Nobody's seen that.
But what you had brought up is so very important because we all deal with that. We all think that, and again, not just the men, but we all think that, you know, I just want to get laid, or I'm just horny, you know, and we have an understanding. There's no commitment here. We both just want to do this, and that's bullshit, you know, and that's bullshit, you know, because there's one of the two is going to have different thoughts and different feelings. You know, it's rare when both of them just, you know, both of you just, and they could both think that they just want to get laid, but there's something there, you know. But anyway, my experience, when you start hitting your late 50s and 60s and stuff, you'll get better at that. It'll go away.
I know my dad hadn't got any better.
Yeah. I'm not a lot better, but I'm better, you know. Yeah, okay. Anybody else got a question on this? This is important stuff, so if you got a question, bring it up. How about principles? Anybody got a principle around this kind of stuff?
I think I have a lot.
Here's
Deb?
one. It kind of plays off of yours. You know, the more women a guy sleeps with, you know, the more of a man he is. And I don't know what the magic number is, but for girls, it's the opposite. So the guy's a stud. He's got to have sex with somebody, but the girl's a whore.
The men will
So-
fuck anything. Anything, it's fact.
No, you're talking about society Now, the way society looks at it, if a woman does it, she's a whore. If a man does it, he's just a horny bastard, right? So that's a principle that you should inventory. If that's a belief you have.
Yeah, it's a principle.
Yeah. Morals, values, and beliefs.
If it's not your belief, but you're mad about it, that's a resentment.
That's a resentment. You put it on a resentment list. Yeah. But if it's a belief of yours, if you really believe that, because you've heard it so many times over the years, you know, I can't do that because I'd be a whore, I'd be a slut, I'd be, in Italian we say buttana. She's a buttana, zoccola buttana. You know, it sounds better in Italian, but it's the same thing. But, yeah, that's a generic principle. So don't forget, when we talk about principles, there's generic principles. Generic principle is one that is common for lots of people to use, and there's personal principles. So that would be a generic principle because it's common. It's a common belief from a lot of people, you know. And it doesn't make it right or true. It's just, you know. So you had another one. You want to share that, or you want to share that other one? The one you talked
From
with
last
me about.
week?
The one me and you talked about. You don't have to share it if you don't want. But that's an interesting one.
I'll share it.
Oh.
The principle that, I guess it was a principle, God hates fags.
Okay. That's a really deep one. Ever since you talked to me about that, I've been thinking about that. That's I think.
That was a harsh one. God doesn't hate,
Yeah.
you know, but it is,
Right.
you hear
It's
it
so-
over.
It's ingrained in you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you're raised a certain way.
Yeah.
You know,
A lot of people raised in church and stuff like that, because they
Yeah.
find stuff like that in the Bible.
you know,
What? You don't mind talking about this,
No,
right?
no,
Okay.
no.
So after you talked to me about that, when I was driving home, I thought about it all the way home, and I thought I even was going to call you, but it's something I don't know why I didn't. But
a mature moment.
yeah, probably. Yeah. I probably had a selfish thought, took me right out of you. But I remember when driving home thinking about that, and I think that, you know, when you go through the inventory process, we'll find out all these things, you know, and I'll be glad to look at it with you, but it seems that it's about guilt on your part. You know, that there's a lot of guilt there because of that principle. So that principle needs to be inventoried. And you need to go through the columns and see what you come out with, you know, along with all the other stuff. But it seemed to me that it was coming from guilt, you know. So this is a good time to talk about there's guilt and there's shame. Okay? Does anybody not know the difference between the two? Not know the difference between the two?
Guilt and shame?
Yeah.
Could you go into it?
Yeah.
Just a second?
Sure. Guilt is I did something wrong and I feel bad or upset about what I did. Shame is I think I'm something wrong. So shame is an internal feeling. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So when I say it was about guilt, it could be more on the shame side.
Definitely go on the shame.
Yeah. So, and that's why I brought up the difference, but the first initial thought is guilt. But then when you look at it, it's more of an internal thing. It seems like shame, you know. Shame, so I think there's something wrong with me. I think there's something the matter with me. I think I'm wrong in some way. It's kind of like what I put on the board here. Detachment is not that you should own nothing, but nothing should own you. And we also want to be able to detach from our negative principles and our negative thinking so they don't own us. And the only way that's going to happen is through an inventory process and a fifth step and 6 and 7. That's the only way that's going to go away, that kind of stuff. you know, and praying, talking to God. Charlotte wrote a whole thing here, but I have to hit the thing for it to open up, so I can't read the whole message, Charlotte.
I was sick.
Go ahead.
I was sick for a long time. I grew up in like a, it wasn't necessarily like a household like God hates fags or anything like that, but it was so modest. You know, you didn't even, you change separately, and very modest views about things. You know, like I made a joke one time, or I was talking to a girl, we were talking about a threesome or something, you know, and like the reaction was like an extremely visceral, hateful reaction towards that kind of behavior. And so for the longest time, actually until I worked the steps, I felt guilt and shame for things that I was into, or things like that. And it took me a long time to come to grips. It's still hard to this day, you know, but the fourth and fifth step, when I discussed with my sponsor and stuff, it did help out, you know, but it still hangs over, you know, just the environment of modesty and judgment and conservative. I thought for a long time, as far back as when I was 8 years old, there was something wrong with me about what I liked, and you know what I mean, like just different views on things. And you know, once I got to the divorce, I'm like, dude, I'm not like it's not what I thought it was. But I carried that with me for so long, you know. And of course I talked to her with my wife, and you know what I mean. And she told me forever that like, dude, that's nothing. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a big deal. I don't know why you're carrying this around.
Yeah.
Like it's some big thing, when you made it out to be something huge. And they were totally like, so? You know, but it's hard. It's hard when you have that judgment and guilt and shame all over you. You know, I got real spun out for a long time because of it.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's why in the book, Bill tries to make it as simple as possible. We treat sex like any other problem. We don't get lost in, you know. So here's the thing, right? When I was dying, and I talk about this when I do the traditions, but when I was dying and I was reached my hand out, and the people in AA and the people in CA reached their hand out for me to help me up, I didn't ask them what they did for a living, what their sexual preferences were, what their religious views were. I just grabbed their hand and let them help me. And so I have to never forget that, because regardless of anything I may think or any principle I may have, in this environment, it is not the place for it. You know, and actually in today's times, it's not the place for it in any environment, really. You know, so your sexual preferences have nothing to do with how I feel about you. And if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict and you need help and you want help, nothing else matters and nothing else counts. And that's where we need to be at when we come in these rooms, you know, and we need to treat everybody that way. I want to read this stuff to you. You might want to write this stuff down. If not, you can watch the tape and read it. But this is interesting because, you know, in the 12 and 12 it talks about the 7 deadly sins. Not in any particular order, right? I believe it's on page 48 in your 12 and 12, I think. Okay, so on the bottom of page 48 and 12 and 12 it says, to avoid falling into confusion over the names these defects should be called, and this is on the 4th step here, let's take a universally recognized list of major human failings. The 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth. Okay? So I looked up these words many years ago. I looked them all up, and there's lots of definitions for these words, but I only wrote down the ones that were pertinent to us here. Pride, I wrote 3 definitions down. Because I always thought pride was something good to have, right? You got to take pride in what you do. You know, be proud, you know. But the definition of pride is too high an opinion of oneself, of one's importance or superiority. The second definition is arrogant behavior. The third definition is to be proud of, take credit for. Right? Pocket my pride. So, too high an opinion of oneself, of one's importance or superiority, arrogant behavior, and to be proud of, to take credit for. Those are the definitions for pride. Greed, and I found something really interesting, that greed comes from the Latin, the root origin of the word greed comes from a Latin word that meant crave more. Crave more. But greed, the definition for greed that I wrote down was an eager or selfish desire, especially for wealth, food, or drink. And the second one was an excessive passion for things. An excessive passion for things. More, right? For people like us, you can take out the word enough from our vocabulary and add the word more. More. Lust. Four definitions for lust. Very interesting, all of them. 1, strong sexual desire, especially when uncontrolled. 2, a passionate or overmastering desire. 3, exceeding proper limits for sexual desires. And 4, simply a craving. I'm sorry, I made a mistake and told you that the word greed, the root origin of that was the Latin word for crave more. It's the word lust, not the word greed. So a craving, and that definition doesn't define sex. It's just a craving, it says. In fact, 2 out of the 4 definitions don't use the word sex in there. The other one is a passionate or overmastering desire. Doesn't say for sex, for anything, right? I can lust lots of things. I have lusted lots of things, not just sexually. Okay, the next one is anger. Anger, 3 definitions. 1, a strong passion or emotion excited by injury, rage. A strong passion or emotion excited by injury, rage. 2, to excite to wrath, enraged. To excite to wrath, enraged. And 3, a strong feeling of displeasure and belligerence. A strong feeling of displeasure and belligerence. It's easy to see just from those definitions how quickly anger can block us from God. Actually, if you look at these definitions, you can see how all of these things block us from God. The 7 deadly sins. Okay, gluttony. 2 definitions. One is eating too much, obviously. The other one I found real interesting. Eager for anything in excess. Gluttony. Eager for anything in excess. Envy, which I think is one of the sickest ones. Because listen to these definitions. Number 1, there's 3 of them. To grudge another person's good fortune. To grudge another person's good fortune. Number 2, pain or distress excited by the sight of another's superiority or success. I'll say it again. Pain or distress excited by the sight of another's superiority or success. So just watching, like, I can't believe that bitch got that new car, I can't believe that son of a bitch got the raise, Number 3, a sense of discontent or jealousy about or desire for another's advantages or possessions. A sense of discontent or jealousy about or desire for another's disadvantages and possessions. Can't believe he got the raise. Can't believe that bitch got a new car. Can't believe they just bought that house. If that son of a bitch can do it, why can't I? You know. Envy. Just tear you up. The last one is sloth. Two definitions. Inactive and sluggish, unnaturally heavy. And the second one is to avoid exertion. And alcoholics and addicts are great about sloth, really, because our motto is, I'll do it tomorrow. To avoid exertion. I'll do that shit tomorrow. That was one of the greatest things about alcohol and drugs. It could take me out of here and now and bring me to Never Never Land, and I could say, I'll do that shit tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes. Right? So recovery is about removing the things that block us from the sunlight of the Spirit so we can get closer to God. So these 7 deadly sins will certainly, absolutely, 100% take us away from God. Block us from God. And that's why they talk about change is not painful. Our resistance to change is what is painful. When I accept myself just as I am, then I begin to change. And here's a good saying here. No principles to live by, no reasons to live. Okay. Let's finish this off here, and the next week we'll do the harms to others, and then we'll start doing, you can start working on your 4th step, and next week hopefully we can go over some of your 4th steps. But here we are on the bottom of page 70, and we've just had an actual personality change. It says, in this book you will read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. If you have already made a decision, 3rd step, and an inventory, the 4th step, of your grosser handicaps. See, grosser handicaps, not any of your good points, right? Your grosser handicap, you have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. And there's an old Confucius saying, right, which is very apropos for here. He who knows himself has insight. He who knows himself has insight. And that's exactly what this is saying. If you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. But you notice that he's saying that you have made a good beginning. So this 4th step is about a beginning of an inventory process that will continue on as long as you live. Some people will call it a 4th step later on. Some will call it a 10th step. Doesn't matter what you do, so long as you do it. Each time you go through the steps, you start with 1 and you go to 12. Okay? And each time you do that, you will have more insight about yourself because you will have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself each time. We've got a few minutes, a couple minutes. Anybody have any questions they want to bring up or talk about? No question? Yes?
Does it have to be pertaining into what we were talking about? Or
No.
So, do you believe that, I talked to somebody else, do you believe that you work the steps over and over again, or you go through the steps once?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is week 17, and way back in the first couple of weeks, we talked about that it's a 12-step program.
Right.
And you work the 12 steps, and you finish, you work the 12 steps, and then you finish and you work the 12 steps. And you keep working the 12 steps on something different.
Right.
Okay? And let me just say this in the last couple minutes that we got. Whatever you guys are working the steps on, when it comes to the 4th step, you are not working the steps on that. Remember we talked about that. Whatever you're working the steps on, first go around should be alcohol and drugs.
Right.
And then something else and something else. But whatever you're working the steps on, it's only the first step that is different. The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, right up to the 12th step is the same process. So, it doesn't matter if you're working the steps on shopping, on relationships, on sex, on gambling, on whatever you work, eating, whatever you're working the steps on. The fourth step is about resentments, fears, sexual conduct, and harms to others. It's not about as those pertain to sex or eating or whatever. Okay? If there's something that pertains to that in your fourth step, you write it down, of course. But you're not working a fourth step on relationships. You're working a fourth step, as the big book calls you to, on resentments, fears, sexual conduct, harms to others. All right, anybody else got a question? Thanks, guys. Be safe. Next week, Charlotte, I'm going to read all your comments when I get home. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read them right now. Thanks, guys. See you.